In this video, I'm going to explain how you can use 11 Plus Lifeline resources most effectively so that your child enjoys the process, feels really well prepared for their 11 Plus tests and picks up some extremely useful skills along the way, getting them ready for a strong start at secondary school. I'm going to show you some examples of how 11 Plus Lifeline can help with multiple choice comprehension, written comprehension, maths, reasoning and creative writing. There's also material for other kinds of writing in 11 Plus Lifeline. For example, for writing essays arguing a point, but I won't get into those things here. 11 Plus Lifeline also includes my solutions to real schools' past papers. These solutions are in the same style as the solutions to my original papers, so I'm not going to discuss them in depth in this video. Let's get started by looking at something that many people assume there isn't much to say about: multiple choice comprehension. This is a typical multiple choice comprehension paper from 11 Plus Lifeline. Some multiple choice papers look like the CEM or GL styles, for example. This one, loosely based on past papers from Latimer Upper School, is useful practice for any multiple choice exam. And indeed for any kind of comprehension, because the key skills are very useful for written comprehension as well. Notice that the comprehension passage is a classic text. As always in 11 Plus Lifeline, chosen to be interesting and to offer an age-appropriate level of difficulty. Sometimes texts are taken from well-known books by famous authors. Sometimes, as here, they are taken from less familiar sources and are designed to offer students something new, perhaps even an interesting new book to find and read. The paper starts with 15 comprehension questions based on the text. Here are the first few. There are also a number of questions to test and develop vocabulary knowledge, and others that focus on grammar and on identifying literary techniques. Perhaps most importantly, right after the questions come my uniquely thorough answer sheets. These not only provide the right solutions, but they show you exactly how to get to them, how to work logically through the options, choosing what to eliminate, and how to make full use of the passage when deciding what the best answer is. They focus on teaching students how to avoid likely mistakes and how to understand each problem in the way that the examiner intended. To show you how all this can help your child, I'm going to focus on question 12. Here's the question again, and here's the paragraph from the text that it refers to, with the quoted phrase underlined. This is a tricky question. There's a lot of information to consider, and it looks as though more than one option could be correct. The basket is a distraction from the smuggled goods on the man's body. He is carrying goods to a hotel. D seems correct too, while C and D are tempting because they talk about brandy and smuggling. This is the sort of question that any child might get stuck on. It might even seem unfair. But this sort of question, where you need all your skill to find the best answer among several possibilities, often turns up in 11 Plus exams. First of all, your child will presumably have a go at the paper, including this question. Their answer might look something like this. You can see that they're already approaching things in the right sort of way, eliminating options that they believe are definitely wrong, considering possibilities, and finally settling on their preferred solution. After completing their answers, your child will want to mark their work, so you'll turn to the answer pages. After marking the preceding questions, you'll get to question 12. Let's focus just on that solution. And let's look at the student's answer alongside it. The first thing they're likely to notice is that their answer is incorrect. In most of the 11 Plus resources you can buy, this will be it. The answer's wrong, you lose a mark, better try harder next time. However, that's no use at all. If a child doesn't understand what was wrong with their method, how can they avoid making the same mistakes in the future? This is where 11 Plus Lifeline's detailed guidance comes in. The solutions don't just give the answer. They don't just explain the answer. They teach children how to think through the answer. First of all, the process of elimination is shown. Looking back at the passage now, your child will be able to see that the brandy is not carried in the basket. It's hidden against the man's body. The main part of my explanation, however, focuses on how to choose between the three options which are, on the surface, all correct, an essential comprehension skill. It warns against answers which answer the question in a very general way, but not specifically. It explains the importance of an answer that deals with the main point, in this case, what the basket was really for, rather than something that is only superficially true. And it makes clear why D is the best answer, and therefore the correct answer to this question. Lastly, I explain what broad lessons to take from the question and how to apply a similar way of thinking to a different sort of problem. If you go through all these ideas carefully with your child, they'll start to gain a really thorough understanding of how comprehension questions are put together and how to approach them confidently. Once your child is happy with my explanations, it's time for them to have another go. Not at the whole paper, but at the questions they found tricky, trying to apply the lessons taught in my answer sheets. It might be best to leave things for a day or two first. It's this repetition that makes learning really effective. Now let's have a look at how 11 Plus Lifeline's papers can help to improve your child's written comprehension skills. My written comprehensions tend to be based on the sort of classic text that often turn up in real exams. This is from Elizabeth Gaskell's novel Mary Barton, which is set in Manchester. The passage describes a dramatic rescue during a factory fire. We're going to look at the very first question. It's a fairly short question and may seem simple, but it's the sort of thing that causes problems for many children. Here's the question, and here's the paragraph from the text that it refers to. And I've underlined the word that's quoted in the question. Many children struggle to explain how texts create certain effects. For example, why the author's language used might make something exciting. For many young people, a text is exciting just because it talks about exciting things. They don't realise that the words and phrases used are at least as important in influencing how we feel. Here's the sort of answer that many children might write. When they come to mark it, they'll see this advice. They'll probably look at the example answers and the mark scheme first. They'll see that the example answers take a rather different approach to theirs, which will make them wonder whether they were on the right track or not. The mark scheme gives guidance for sharing out marks, but doesn't really clarify what is a correct and what's an incorrect answer. This is where my careful explanations come in. For this student, the most immediately useful thing will be my discussion of the most likely mistake. The example of an incorrect answer matches theirs rather closely. They'll realise that they have written about the general situation, but not specifically about the word quivering as required by the question. Then they will look back at the rest of my discussion, which suggests the clearest way of thinking about things. What does the word literally mean about what's happening in the story? What does the word suggest in a more metaphorical, more poetic way? Both of these questions focus on the word quivering itself, which is important. At this point, the mark scheme will start to make more sense. As well as having properly understood the question and learnt a lot of lessons to carry into their future work, the student is now in a position to give a fair mark to their answer. Their reason 2 is obviously very similar to the example of a wrong response given at the end of the discussion. However, their reason 1 is an in-between case. Yes, it looks a bit like part of the example wrong answer. But then this reason is rather closer to the implications of the word quivering, and even if it's less specific, it looks quite like part of the example answer's reason 1. This student's reason 1, okay, it isn't worth a whole mark, but it probably deserves a half mark, at least some credit. Therefore, the total answer for the question might reasonably be something like 0.5 out of 2. Working like this, children learn to assess their answers like a real examiner would, and to understand really thoroughly what is going on in a comprehension exercise. I talked about repetition earlier. This is a perfect example of a question that could be repeated fairly soon. On the one hand, the student has learnt a lot of new things, and they're likely to forget them if they leave things too long. On the other hand, they didn't get their initial answer totally wrong, so the question is unlikely to seem impossible and become frustrating. After each new attempt, they should look back at my notes and at their original answer. It's worth mentioning that 11 Plus Lifeline also includes comprehensions teaching longer, mini-essay style answers. Comprehensions focusing on short answers, and even on shorter, precisely focused answers. And comprehensions based on poems. A few of my comprehensions, like this last poetry one, combine multiple choice and written answer questions in the same paper, as this happens in some schools' exams. And there are many more kinds of comprehension exercise. Most importantly, all of them focus on developing the same core English skills, relevant in virtually any 11 Plus exam and vital for any child's secondary school education. And all of them take care to keep work interesting, as engaging and enjoyable as possible. Enough comprehension. Let's have a look at some maths. All my maths papers are clearly graded by difficulty. This one is moderately challenging. In other words, it has some tricky questions, but no horrible ones, along with some easier sections. This is a tiger themed paper, so let's have a look at a tiger related question. Question 10. This type of question is an 11 Plus classic. Similar questions will talk about decorators painting a wall, for example. Children and adults often find this kind of task difficult, above all else because they can't see how to organise the information in a way that makes mathematical sense. This is exactly the sort of uncertainty that my answers are designed to resolve, by offering clear systems for turning awkward questions into clear and repeatable maths. Because I've spent a long time talking about comprehension, I'm going to save time now. Rather than showing you a student's answer and talking through it, I'm going to take you straight to the answer pages so you can see how they work. The solutions to my 11 Plus Lifeline maths problems include handwritten example answers, which allow children to see what good working out might realistically look like in an exam. As you can see, sometimes more than one method is shown. I also include step-by-step discussions of the relevant methods, which make the example answers completely clear. Often, there's revision of core maths knowledge that may have been forgotten. The answer is spread over 2 pages here, and it shows 2 different methods that a student might choose to imitate. The examples aren't artificially neat. They're designed to be clear, but also to be in a style that children can easily replicate under time pressure. See, for example, how the tables shown here have clear lines, but also how these haven't been drawn with a ruler. My 11 Plus Lifeline maths papers roam widely through the 11 Plus syllabus, so that children are really well prepared for their exams. As with the comprehension work, repeating tricky questions after a few days and coming back to whole papers after a few weeks or months are things that will help knowledge to sink in and encourage a child to grow in confidence. Now let's have a quick look at a reasoning paper. By now, I think you'll have a good idea of what to expect from these. Each reasoning paper offers 50 questions, with a mixture of verbal and non-verbal reasoning. There's usually a bit more verbal than non-verbal reasoning, so if your child is only preparing for a verbal test, you can miss out the non-verbal questions and still get lots of value from each paper. The majority of the papers also include 3D reasoning questions, like this one, because these are set by many schools. There's a huge range of verbal and non-verbal question types. Here are a few examples. As you can see, everything is clearly presented, and non-verbal questions are lovingly drawn, to entertain as well as to teach. Now let's have a quick look at some solutions. The questions have clear answers and careful explanations whenever needed. The explanations focus on explaining the thought processes behind each kind of question, so children learn how to think logically and properly understand reasoning. And I'm careful to point out the key lessons to learn. The solutions to some 3D questions include cut out and fold models so that children can play with the shapes and visualise the problems in real life. The last sort of paper I'd like to show you is for creative writing, because these are a bit different, and I think they're one of the most special things about 11 Plus Lifeline. Lots of people wonder whether it's possible to teach good creative writing through worksheets. I've set out to prove that it is. Based on Lifeline members' feedback, my writing resources seem to have made a big difference for a lot of children. Even if your child's 11 Plus exam won't include a writing section, there's a huge amount of value that they will gain from these resources, giving them a really strong foundation for their future education and helping them to enjoy and appreciate both writing and reading better than they did before. The first thing to say is that there are many kinds of writing resources in Lifeline. Packs like this teach children how to write good stories of standard exam length, about a page and a quarter in most cases. This pack contains 31 pages of resources. Packs like this one explore the detail of how to write creatively, working closely on a particular paragraph. What are the different ways of bringing a scene to life? How does a famous author do it? A range of exercises teach children to develop their writing skills and to understand their existing abilities in more depth. This pack focuses on teaching children to create stunning first paragraphs for their stories, while this pack focuses on final paragraphs. Moving away a little from creative descriptions, there are packs like this one that focus on persuasive essay writing skills, teaching children how to consider different points of view, form strong arguments, and structure their work effectively. There are some packs designed around the special requirements of exams like the Essex CSSE, but which are useful to all children. This one shows how to write compact descriptions in just a few sentences, while this one teaches children to write an effective but imaginative set of instructions for a person who must perform a simple task. This quick overview should give you an idea of the range of writing resources in 11 Plus Lifeline, and also of how much the different tasks overlap, with many packs that reinforce the skills in others, either by examining a particular skill in further detail or by taking skills from one task and applying them in a different context. I'm going to give you a quick look inside a pack teaching students how to write a complete story really well. This pack helps students to understand their own writing by comparing other children's work to their own. By learning to assess other people's work and seeing how I've assessed it, they learn to see things from the point of view of a reader and the perspective of a marker. A clear pattern of study is suggested, but the resources are flexible. Students and their parents can use them in whatever way best suits their needs. First, students are encouraged to write a story based on a picture. There's guidance about length and, if the exam is near, timing. There's an exam-style answer sheet with guidelines for an ideal length. The mark scheme offers students a clear framework for assessing their work and an insight into what a professional marker might be looking for. However, it's by looking at other people's stories, assessing their strengths and weaknesses themselves, and seeing how a marker might judge them, that children gain the skills to understand their own writing better. The answers featured in this pack were written by two children, Natalie and Anya, who won a writing competition based on the same task. First of all, the stories are given complete, without any comment from me. You'll notice that this one went beyond my length guidelines, but that isn't a problem if the quality can be sustained. The pack recommends that students use the mark scheme already provided to assess these two stories before they read my comments. This gives them an opportunity to try being a marker. What mark would they give to these pieces of work? Next, I go through the stories step by step, talking about what's good and suggesting simple improvements along the way. Here, I'm discussing both girls' first paragraphs. You'll notice that I include pen markings to show what caught my eye and what can safely be crossed out. They're both really good stories, so there are a lot of positives to learn from. But there are still some of the common mistakes that lots of people make. This part of the pack looks in detail at each part of the girls' answers. Of course, children are likely to get much more out of this if they can discuss it with an adult than if they're just left to read through it on their own. Let's speed through to the final section. In this last part, I show how these stories will be rated according to the mark scheme given earlier. I explain how they meet the level criteria for content and for English. Students will be able to compare this to their own marking of the stories and learn whether their judgment was close to mine, and if not, how they might change their approach to assessing other people's work and therefore learn to assess their own work better. Perhaps unsurprisingly, bearing in mind that they won a writing competition, these two stories score very highly indeed. The student will now be in a position to go back to their own story and mark it more expertly. And perhaps, based on what they've learnt, to have another go. Don't forget that, as I mentioned earlier, there are lots of other writing pack designs with different exercises and different structures designed to develop different skills. The variety also stops things from getting repetitive. I said that I wouldn't talk about my solutions to past papers in this video. It's even written on your screen. However, perhaps a very quick overview might be useful. This, in brief, is how my real past paper solutions work. I send you a link to a publicly available maths or English paper from a popular school. I also send my example solutions and detailed explanations. These solution pages are just like the ones I provide with my original papers, which you've already seen, with the same careful explanations and the same demonstrations of exactly how to write an effective exam answer. Although I think that my own original papers test 11+ syllabus skills more carefully than many real papers do, it's very useful for children to put their skills to the test in the context of actual past exams, while also benefiting from the sort of answer materials offered through 11+ Lifeline. There's one quick thing on a different note that I'd like to mention before I end. Beware of time limits. When children work in a rush, they tend to practice and reinforce their mistakes as much as their skills. They learn shortcuts rather than solid methods based on a good understanding. In fact, when children struggle to complete work in time, it's usually because they lack a proper understanding of some key skills, not because they need to learn how to move more quickly. I usually recommend that timed practice should be left until the last month or two before the exams, perhaps apart from a very occasional timed paper in earlier months so that children get a sense of what an exam feels like. For this reason, although 11+ Lifeline papers often provide optional time limits, for those children who need them because their exams are coming up, you shouldn't normally use them. Let your child take as long as they need. 11+ Lifeline is designed for the last 12 to 18 months before the 11+, after children have completed the Year 4 syllabus. Used over a good period of time, it will give students the chance to become familiar with an extremely wide range of question types and gain expertise with the relevant skills. It's also very useful for last-minute revision, on the other hand, even if there are only a few weeks left. The papers are so similar to many real exams, and the solution pages show exactly how to write a really good answer in a test, in a way that possibly no other 11+ resources do, making for excellent long-term or last-minute preparation. If your child's still in Year 4, it might be best to wait a little, unless they feel very confident. If they're in Year 5 or Year 6, now is the perfect time to use 11+ Lifeline. To sign up, visit www.11pluslifeline.com or search online for 11+ Lifeline. There are free samples on the same page if you scroll down to this section. You can register by clicking on one of these buttons, or this one. Remember that you can easily change your subscription level at any time, so don't worry too much about choosing the right one straight away. I hope this video has been useful. Feel free to get in touch if you have any questions at all.